Welcome to Warehouse Automation Matters. I'm your host, Mary Hart, and I'm here today with Greg Walls, Vice President of Revenue at Paccurate, to discuss the importance of better packaging decisions in shipping. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mary. I'm glad to be here.
Can you start by telling us a bit about your role and how you became involved in the industry?
Sure, yeah, Mary. I'm a VP of Revenue here at Paccurate. So in my job here, I oversee sales, solutions, marketing, business development, kind of a catch-all for revenue. And I began my career in manufacturing, but started in supply chain about 7 or 8 years ago when I joined a small AMR startup called Six River Systems. I was fortunate enough to be an early employee there and kind of help grow the company through our ultimate acquisition by Shopify and sort of the following acquisition from there. So it's been an exciting ride. Fortunate enough to have joined with a strong team early on, and that's brought me here to where I am today.
So let's get into it. How does right-sized packaging automation work, and why is it becoming such a critical factor in warehouse operations today?
So, I guess to describe what it is to begin with, right-sized packaging can best be described as always utilizing a box that will be the perfect minimum necessary dimensions to fit the product in. Said more plainly, it's having the ability to pack and ship items in container sizes that will always yield whatever the highest possible volume utilization of space is. There's two parts to this. There's the cartonization of the order, which is usually software and done in the WMS, ERP, OMS. That's where we live. And then there's the physical creation of the corresponding right-size box, which is where companies like PackSize live, or Spark, or CMC. And paired together, they can essentially always generate that right-size package, is what the industry's term. As far as why it's matters and becoming so critical today, no surprises here, right? Transportation costs, i.e. FedEx and UPS shipping rates, go up and up and up. Every year there's another GRI, general rate increase. And so there's a cost component here. And, maybe more from a holistic perspective, there's a waste component here too. And a lot of our customers care deeply about how much waste is being sent out in the supply chain. And it turns out if you right size your packages, you can save upwards of 30 to 50% of your corrugated waste versus maybe a standard suite of boxes. For those two reasons, we're seeing a pretty big explosion of interest in sort of the right-sized space.
Thank you. You talked a bit about FedEx and UPS and the shipping costs there. Shipping costs are a significant concern for many businesses. How does using that right carton size contribute further to lowering those costs? And what impact can it have on the company's bottom line?
To explain this a little bit, we'll probably have to talk about what dimensional weight is. Formerly being of what I call inside the four walls and now being on the transportation side of the house, it's a little bit of learning for me and probably some of the listeners out there. To make a long story short, FedEx and UPS actually penalize you quite heavily when you ship small, light items in a bigger than necessary box. They do this by utilizing something called dimensional weight, which is just a math formula you negotiate upfront with your carrier that basically tries to ensure the space that a package uses in the truck is factored into the cost, not just the raw weight. So said more plainly, it's a pricing formula they use to ensure that a truck full of pillows versus a truck full of lead is closer in cost than the actual weight alone would imply. As far as how it impacts the bottom line, when you pay on dimensional weight versus the actual weight, which is how it's described in the transportation space, you're almost always paying more money than just the weight of the product itself. So we've seen scenarios where getting billed on dimensional weight leads to almost a 20 to 30% increase in overall transportation costs, which can be avoided or at least mitigated in a big way with better cartonization and right-sized packaging together.
I did not know the term dimensional weight before today, so I've learned something new here. In what ways does optimizing carton sizes help to increase throughput in a warehouse? And are there any metrics or examples you can share that highlight these improvements?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question and one that we are starting to explore a little more. And actually, Mary, has kind of a direct impact on your world with AMRs, and I'll explain what I mean here in a moment. But optimizing carton sizes has a couple of direct and indirect impacts to throughput. From a direct perspective, optimizing parcel size and being confident in the cartonization of the products helps save time at the pack-out station. By having a human packer, instead of having them decide which box to put items in, the system just tells them, and they can trust that it's going to be the right recommendation, the items will fit, very fast and efficient from there. From a more indirect perspective, Mary, and as I mentioned, impacting a little bit of your world, when you utilize best-in-class cartonization and right-sized packaging machinery, you can usually reduce boxes per order in the e-com world down to about 1, and you can drive up the cubic utilization of space on a pick card or an AMR. So Essentially you can fit more product or more picks onto a locust bot, a six river bot, an onwards robotics bot. And as our listeners probably know or familiar with the AMR space, more work on an AMR equals higher ROI equals higher units per hour. And so we have really stayed in kind of our lane from the bread and butter perspective of just doing the cartonization at the packout station. But we have in the past 6 months began a number of strategic partnerships with automation vendors specifically who are beginning to understand how optimizing cubic space can actually drive up the ROI of their solutions. AMRs, goods to person systems, VLMs, everybody can benefit from some level of cubic optimization.
Let's go into another topic. Sustainability is top of mind for many in the industry. How does right-sized packaging contribute to a lower carbon footprint, and what role does Paccurate play in helping companies meet their environmental goals?
Yeah, and I'm glad you're asking about this, Mary, because it's an important topic and one that I think has been given short shrift in the past couple of years, and understandably so, right? With the economy and business is struggling a little bit more so than perhaps the decade previous. Plain and simple, right-sized packaging reduces corrugated waste and void fill waste, usually to the tune of 20 to 30%. Sometimes upwards of 50% when using a fully complete solution with the physical right sizing, like a pack size machine as well. And one of the things that our customers really love is that this type of savings, this right sizing, both saves money and saves waste. So it's both a green initiative and a cost savings. And for those of the listeners out there who are familiar with a lot of green initiatives, that's usually not the case. A lot of these green renewable initiatives actually end up costing more than they sort of generate. And so there's always been that tug and that push and pull. And so in our world, we're fortunate that by directly impacting that size of the carton, you can usually get the best bang for your buck and the best of both worlds there. Beyond the literal impact of just the cartons, we're actually going to be launching a new analytics tool as part of our expanded platform, which will help companies better understand and track their corrugated use, their fill rates, their void fill costs. Our big dream here and why we started the company and kind of why we've taken on some funding and are looking to expand so fast is fulfillment centers we think can become much more dynamic about this type of thing, about box sizes and whether it's utilizing our simulation tool to right size your cartons or a pack size machine. I'll give you one example. There's a big US apparel retailer that we're working with, a name that everybody would be familiar with, and simple example, but we found out that just by providing a right sizing suite of boxes for their summer line versus their winter line yields almost a 12% transportation savings. When you're talking about a transportation bill upwards of 50, 60, 70 million dollars, that is massive amount of savings, not to mention all the corrugated waste we save and such. Our big dream is to get people to eventually be able to almost think about this on a more quarterly basis. Obviously, you can't just change your box sizes out, left, right, and center every day, again, unless you have sort of the physical hardware to go with it. But for most of us who don't have a pack size machine, even just being able to get to a place where maybe quarterly you could look at this right sizing problem, whether it uses our simulation platform or your own internal math, would help probably drive a significant amount of savings and, again, waste out of the supply chain.
How easy is it to integrate Paccurate's technology with the warehouse's existing systems?
Yeah, integration, everybody's favorite topic in the supply chain world. I come from a background of robotics automation with big, complex multi-message integrations into a WMS and a lot of business critical systems. Implementing something like our cartonization routine, which is a bolt-on to a WMS or ERP, is simpler. It's usually just one message up, one message down. You send us what you need to cartonize, we send it to you back. It's all a very modern architecture, so JSON over HTTPS, very very standard stuff that a lot of modern WMSs can actually plug and play with quite simply. Where you tend to run into problems, and our audience listeners will be familiar with this, is with the legacy WMS systems. Old school AS400. There's still a ton of those out there, and they're almost always just a little bit more challenging to integrate with. So all that being said, on the grand scale of things, I would rate us probably a very far to the left on the lighter side of an integration. We've had people go live with sort of modern architectures in as little as 2 weeks, but more typically you're looking at about 4 to 6 weeks of sort of on and off testing, UAT, production go live, etc.
Thank you. And what should businesses consider when they're looking to implement right-sized packaging automation?
So probably the one thing that really matters, we can handle, and right-sized packaging can sort of handle any array of SKUs, whether they're big or small. In fact, PackSize got their start in the furniture industry, large products, bulky products. Yeah, that's something I didn't know either until being in this world. So that all of the type of fulfillment you do, the orders, the products, none of that stuff matters too much. Well, honestly, the one thing that really matters is your dimensions. And so we often have a lot of people who are starting on this journey come ask us, where do we begin? How do we start? Our only advice and recommendation is, make sure your item master is at least okay. No one has perfect dimensions, nobody, and you can put a lot of effort into sort of that marginal, last 5%. But we typically guide people that if you have about 80% that you feel well about, think about a typical 80-20 rule, especially if your fast moving SKUs are all pretty well documented. You get a pretty tremendous bang for your buck, even if there's still a couple of scenarios where you might have to manually override. But really, at the end of the day, it's just dimensions. If you have dimensional data, you can almost always begin to utilize both the software and hardware of right sizing pretty immediately.
I know you shared the example about the fashion industry. Are there other case studies or real world examples you'd like to share where Paccurate helped a warehouse reduce costs, increase efficiency, lower its environmental impact?
Yeah, I just released another case study actually a couple months ago with a 3PL in our own backyard, Mary, up in the Massachusetts area, which is Barrett Distribution Centers, a very forward-looking 3PL, I will say, from a technology perspective. And they utilize both our simulation product, which we didn't talk too much about today, but essentially allows you to right size a box suite without the physical kind of hardware component of it, as well as our API to basically, on behalf of one of their clients, which is a healthcare and beauty brand specializing in shampoos, they reduced the transportation cost by about 6% across their fulfillment or annual order volume. And we're actually able to reduce dimensional weight and corrugated by about 34%, which is a tremendous savings and led to a roughly 3 or 4 month ROI from a payment perspective. Really interesting. Barrett actually utilizes our technology across multiple of their sites and are ripping out some of the legacy cartonization providers they use. One of the big reasons is just they're realizing that in the 3PL space, although there's some different structures, commercial structures, who pays for what, by basically allowing them to try to save their own clients money on transportation, they can drive up the retention. And it's sort of an area that many 3PLs ignore because that's outside the four walls, and 3PLs are super focused on figure out what's inside the four walls, and the customer can handle the transportation. Turns out, just like with other types of businesses, if you try to take a little more holistic look at your customer, you can tend to win some business even if you aren't always the lowest cost provider. So really interesting use case, great customer of ours, and we can share that case study after the call here if you want.
For businesses looking to stay competitive like Barrett or elsewhere, how important is packaging optimization, and how does Paccurate give them an edge over others in the market?
Yeah, just to kind of summarize, we believe packaging automation with cartonization, software, the hardware, whatever element of it you can implement, becomes competitive really through a cost perspective. If you're thinking about saving 30 to 50 cents per order, sometimes we can save over $1 per order depending on how big the items are and some of the details of the overall cartonization pack. But addition to the sort of direct savings as far as you can get from some of this cartonization technology, there's also a customer experience element too. And all of us who are listening, and you probably, Mary, yourself, have experienced how annoying it is to get a little item in a huge box that's rattling around in there. Forget about the damage to the item or anything like that. It just feels kind of crappy. And in fact, one of our very first big enterprise customers, another US large retailer, the whole project kicked off with them because some executive got a very nasty note on Instagram, I believe, of all places, of someone who had a very poorly packaged item and said, "What the hell? You guys can do better than this." And that kind of led to a whole introspective analysis to the operations team to understand that there was a problem with the cartonization happening. And I won't bore you with all the details, but one of the things that differentiates us is just our ability to handle a lot of these very complex cases. Cartonization is not a new topic by any means. It's not a new technology. Many WMSs have a basic version of it. But most of the time, those basic versions just don't really do enough, or they really only cover 60 to 70% of the use cases. And you're stuck with these terrible customer experiences and high cost overruns. So, I guess if that was one message I'd put out there, while we always focus on the hard dollar savings, and there's some good ones there, the customer experience is important. And we have heard feedback from our customers that they in turn hear feedback from their customers that the better cartonization, just people like that better. It just feels better to get a less wasteful package. So
That makes sense. I definitely have received packages like that where
yep.
there's this one tiny little item in a huge box. Let's go on to challenges. What are some of the common challenges that companies face when they're adopting cartonization or packaging solutions, and how does Paccurate help them overcome these hurdles?
At the end of the day, there really isn't too much outside of the dimensions that are typically a challenge for someone adopting this. There's always change management, which is important. You have to understand if you're putting in some kind of automated system, a pack size machine or new software, Your people have to be trained on it. They have to know that it's not going to be an instantaneous fix. There's ramp up time. Mary, your own team can probably attest to this, but there's some time, some change management time that's required to really begin to fully utilize any kind of automation. It's true of supply chain, it's true of manufacturing, it's true of everywhere. But still, from a really purely tactical perspective, good dimensions are really the key that you need to unlock all of the various savings of both the hardware and the software providers in this space.
Fabulous. What trends do you see on the horizon for packaging automation, and how do you anticipate the Paccurate will evolve to meet future warehouse needs?
So one of the trends we're seeing actually is a lot more SIOC, so ship and own container. And as a sustainability focused company, we love that. It's not great for business, so to speak, but honestly, there's a lot of products out there that could probably just be shipped on their own. Slap a label on it. Not everything, of course, things like high value items can't just be kind of left out on someone's porch visibly like that. There's damage constraint. There's a number of reasons why you can't just do that. Still, you'd be surprised how many people are just shipping out a box with a box inside of it, which talk about your poor customer experiences, right? So seeing a lot more SIOC, which is helpful. Seeing a lot more people going over to mailers and poly bags, simply because of a cost perspective. And that is something cartonization can still help with, although it's a little bit more straightforward than your typical cartons may be. But those are kind of two of the big initiatives I'd say we see most people talking about. And of course, there's just an ever-growing sort of shift towards the automated physical solutions. Again, like a PackSize, a CMC, a Spark, simply because as people begin to get more comfortable with automation and warehouses move from that manual world to automated, they're starting to realize, and Locust played a big part in this, after all the picking focus of the past 6 or 7 years, the bottleneck has moved. And now the bottleneck is at pack out. And so now people are starting to say, okay, we got our super fast 30 Locust spots running around. We're picking at 200 units per hour. Hey, but it doesn't actually help you all that much unless the pack out station is also producing at that rate. So yeah, those are just some of the trends I'd say we hear from people, things from the industry that I would say are relevant to our world.
And for warehouse managers and operators who are listening in, what practical steps would you recommend they take to start reaping the benefits of cartonization and right-sized packaging?
Yeah, so beyond the dimensional discussion like we had earlier, maybe this is a time I'll do a minor plug for sort of a part of our product. But although we focus heavily on our cartonization execution, which is that live API we can put into your WMS or ERP, we actually have a whole simulation platform that we sort of invented accidentally. There's a whole long story there, but it's turned into a product of its own, of particular interest in the enterprise space. And actually what we can do is, assuming you have your dimensions set and some historical data, we can take all of that information, including your rate cards, your cost per package, everything, model it out to a baseline, and then actually run, just kind of using cloud computing to run millions and millions and millions of cartonization scenarios, right? Think about different size boxes, different size rules, and essentially produce other types of examples where here's what 3 different size boxes might yield in savings. Here's what 5 might save. Here's what 7. We can even simulate a pack size machine. We can simulate a Spark machine. So we can basically help customers as they begin to think about fixing their right sizing problem or their pack out, give them the data and sort of the optionality to say, okay, here's maybe my savings if I just focus on right sizing my carton suite. Here's my savings if I focus on putting in some hardware like a pack size machine. Here's my savings if I double down on the cartonization and think about adding all kinds of 3D rules like stacking and nestability and exclusion rules and all of the fun little rabbit hole scenarios I won't bore you with, but get quite complex from a cartonization standpoint.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about the impact of cartonization and right-sized packaging on the supply chain and the benefits it can bring to warehouse operations?
I guess I would just close with the final thoughts of going back to the customer experience. And I may sound like a broken record here, but again, putting all the savings aside, having your customer believe that you as a fulfillment center or a company both care about the environment, sustainability as far as the waste that it goes into a package, but also care enough that the product arrives seemingly well packed and not damaged, and frankly a little bit of care was put into it, can have a pretty monumental shift on your overall retention of that customer and lifetime earnings from them. Again, it's hard. It's one of those kind of hard to quantify areas of value, and supply chain is rife with these things, but it's kind of nice. You get the direct transportation savings to go to your boss and tell them this is why we're doing the project. But I can promise you, just from our past couple of years of experience really expanding the use of this tool, your customers' customers are paying attention to, and there's value in that if you do this the right way.
Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. And thanks again, Greg, for joining me today. It was a great discussion. And thanks as always to our listeners. We're here to help you move what matters in your warehouse.
Thank you, Mary.